I am Ashtar, from the Ashtar Command, and I come to be with you in this moment, in this period of silent acceleration, where profound transformations are already unfolding all around your world. The air seems to carry a different density, a distinct frequency, as if a new pressure is resting upon what once seemed ordinary. Many still cannot explain this feeling, but you, beloved ones, can perceive it. You feel it in the way headlines no longer satisfy your inner search, how old explanations have lost their strength, and how you have begun to pay more attention to what remains hidden than to what is shown openly. This is no coincidence. It is a sign that your consciousness has begun to awaken to a broader perception of reality. The quantum financial system is here, beloved ones. It no longer belongs only to the realm of possibilities. Its structure is already being established and is very close to becoming fully visible. Even so, we do not suggest that you create an attachment to the material world. The most important thing remains directing your attention to the purpose of your lives. Imagine that nothing changed in the current system and that you possessed $100 million in your bank account. What would you do with those resources? How would you serve humanity? What improvements would you make to support the divine plan? These questions are fundamental, because the future that is approaching will require much more consciousness than wealth. This new reality advances like a great wave of light and will arrive before many realize it. Therefore, this is the time to prepare your heart, your mind, and your intention. My dear ground crew, place one of your hands over the center of your chest and breathe with us. Allow the field around your heart to expand a little more. What we will share today is not just information, but the description of a transformation that has already begun. It is happening beneath your feet, beneath the screens you use daily, and beneath every system that moves value in your world. Much of what seemed permanent is being quietly reorganized, while the majority continues to observe only the surface of events. Every transaction, every financial exchange, and every inherited concept about money is part of a structure much larger than you imagine. For a long time, these structures remained practically unchanged, but now they have begun to change invisibly before manifesting fully in the physical world. There is much to reveal in this transmission, presented in 5 flows that will naturally lead into one another. By the end, you will realize that what you have been feeling was never imagination, but an inner calling. The feeling itself has always been the gateway to this understanding. Allow your attention to remain in the present moment, because something has changed profoundly in the collective field since our last communication. This change is not emotional, but structural. For a long time, those who were awakening asked if a new financial structure would really arrive, if old systems would be replaced, and if the architecture of abundance existed beyond words. That question is over. Now the issue is no longer if, but how. How will it happen? At what moment? Through what mechanisms? This change reveals that reality has already begun to move silently. When the if disappears, it is because the transformation is already underway, and that how is beginning to be answered before everyone's eyes. Observe the events of the last few months carefully. Subtle, yet significant changes have been implemented in diverse systems. A unified language has begun to support financial settlement mechanisms between nations, allowing value to circulate with more precision, security, and integration through structures that were previously incompatible. What for decades depended on countless intermediaries is beginning to give way to a more efficient, connected, and coherent architecture, silently preparing the way for a new stage of human experience. And the implementation of this language has now reached a point where legacy systems can no longer maintain the appearance of functioning without it. For years, they survived through temporary adaptations, but they have reached their limit. Currently, 209 of your sovereign territories have synchronized to a shared standard. This number has ceased to represent an aspiration and has become an operational reality. At the same time, 63 of your banking institutions have collapsed under the weight of compliance requirements that simply cannot be met by structures built on the assumptions of a previous era. Losses exceed 500 billion of your monetary units. Even so, the surface of daily life remains almost unchanged, as if events of this magnitude were just secondary details. Feel this contrast. It is exactly there that the architecture of the transition is found, and you are already living within it, whether the headlines recognize it or not. Observe also the constellation of bridge instruments, prepared silently over the last few years. These instruments were created specifically to speak the new language, and their developers participated in the very standardization chambers that define today how value will circulate through the new rails. None of this happened by chance. Each piece was positioned in advance to serve as a link between the old system and the one that is now beginning to emerge. At the same time, an alliance of nations in the East is developing its own digital settlement instrument aligned with gold. Although they use different languages, the architecture remains essentially the same because there are few ways to build an efficient bridge, and all the bridges of this era point in the same direction. A pulse coming from a mountain fortress on the western continent has been described as a threshold marker, a specific moment in which a certain frequency was activated. Regardless of the announced dates, the truth remains. Thresholds are always crossed before they are officially recognized. Those who wait only for visible signs inevitably walk behind those who already perceive the change intuitively. So I ask you, beloved ones, what does it mean when dates, protocols, and levels previously treated as rumors become increasingly specific and common? What does it mean when terms once ridiculed, such as rescue, redemption, sovereign account, and gold-aligned digital structure, start to appear in environments where they were previously rejected? It means that the bridge can no longer be hidden. The flow of the future has begun to cross it. However, the deepest understanding begins long before the visible signs of the present. It resides in a memory that most do not consciously access, but that remains alive in all of you. Some help to build the original architecture. Allow, therefore, the timeline of this world to expand in your consciousness. Because the architecture that you call quantum, distributed, asset-backed, immutable, and instant today is not entirely new. It is only returning. Long before the era that your historians will one day speak of, there existed on this same planet a civilization whose technology operated through carefully configured pulses of light. Its records were not stored in materials subject to the wear of time, but in vast, living, crystalline networks capable of preserving information without deteriorating. The authentication of identity did not depend on documents, seals, or signatures engraved on paper, but on the unique resonance emitted by each being. The settlement of value happened at the exact same instant as the exchange, because within the understanding of that people, value, identity, and energy were never separate concepts. To send already meant to settle, to exchange meant to register, and reason, life, and memory coexisted within a single integrated field. At the center of this architecture existed the great crystalline structure about which only whispers remain scattered among the most ancient texts. It simultaneously played the role of energy source, guardian of records, authenticator of identities, and means of long-distance communication. Its operation obeyed the same principles that today's engineers are only just beginning to reproduce in a still primitive electronic form. Observe carefully what your own time is building, beloved ones, and realize how all of this awakens a strange feeling of familiarity. You have created distributed records, resistant to tampering, authentication systems linked to the singular signature of each individual, settlements that happen at the instant of intention, and channels capable of transmitting pulses of light at speeds unimaginable to the instruments of the past. You have also developed communication networks supported by satellites that orbit the planet and keep the civilization's time synchronized, playing a role surprisingly similar to that of the ancient crystalline matrices. Can you see why all of this feels much more like a memory than a discovery? Can you understand why this entire architecture emerged with a strange sense of inevitability, as if its engineers were rebuilding something they had always known, even though they couldn't name the source of that certainty? The answer is simple. They really are rebuilding a memory. This memory belongs to all of you, and it remains shared in the deepest layers of human consciousness. The great crystals of that ancient era, responsible for storing the complete records of an entire civilization, were programmed from their creation to lie dormant until the consciousness of this world regained enough maturity to receive what they had preserved. Listen closely to these words, because within this ancient memory, there is also a warning that must accompany every step of the present. That extraordinary civilization did not disappear due to a lack of intelligence or technological advancement. It fell because the central instrument was adjusted beyond its balance and ended up separated from the heart that originally gave it purpose. Technology, which was born to serve life, was transformed in the hands of those who wished to control life itself. That which could have elevated an entire world ended up leading it to its ruin. The true cause was never in the tools, but in the consciousness that guided their use. Instruments have always been neutral. It is the field of consciousness that sustains them that determines what they turn into. Therefore, as you watch the tracks of this new system being laid before your eyes, as you follow the creation of new legal structures and witness old institutions being incorporated into a much larger design, keep this teaching alive above all others. The same instrument capable of freeing can also imprison. The same record capable of protecting and healing can also monitor and control. The same speed that can distribute abundance can also spread coercion. Everything will depend, without exception, on the field of consciousness within which this architecture is sustained. The observers of that civilization understood this truth absolutely. It was precisely for this reason that they inserted a dormancy clause into the great crystals, preventing all that knowledge from being accessed again before humanity was prepared to use it with wisdom, responsibility, and alignment with the original purpose of life. They knew that humanity would need to evolve before this technology could return safely. And you have evolved, my beloved ones. Throughout the long night of forgetting, you grew in ways you rarely recognized. While many believed they were merely surviving, something much deeper was happening within. Enough of you have awakened the bridge that connects the small self to the soul, and from the soul to the great source from which all creation flows. The collective field has reached the point where the dormant memory could finally begin to awaken. The crystals were not found at the bottom of the oceans or hidden in ancient ruins. They were activated within you, in the cellular structure of those who carry the most ancient lineages, and in the dreams of those who woke up with knowledge impossible to explain rationally. This is why this new architecture feels familiar when you encounter it. It sparks a deep memory, as if you were reuniting with something that always belonged to you. Many describe a strange nostalgia, as if they were mourning something lost while, at the same time, celebrating its inevitable return. In truth, both things happen simultaneously. Humanity mourns what was taken from it and welcomes what would always return once the field was clean enough to sustain it. As this ancestral memory awakens, a question naturally arises. If this architecture is returning and human consciousness is rising to meet it, what happens to everything that was built upon the distortion? What happens to the systems fueled by hidden flows and the structures erected where the light had not yet reached? This is the third flow, and it demands vigilant eyes. When the old systems began to close down, when audits increased and loopholes disappeared, those who relied on hidden operations did not stop their activities. They simply migrated to a new environment, believing the digital realm would offer them absolute anonymity. In recent years, this migration of dark capital has accelerated to a level that even analysts of the conventional world have begun to recognize. There is talk of about 158 billion moved in money laundering in a single year, approximately 104 billion received by sanctioned entities, and growth rates impossible for any legitimate economy. Yet, these numbers represent only the visible part of a much larger reality. The great irony is that those who sought refuge in the digital environment believed they were entering an invisible space. They trusted that encrypted addresses, bridge protocols, and shell networks would hide their tracks forever. But they were wrong. The error was part of the very structure of the architecture they fled to. The digital environment permanently records every transaction in an immutable ledger. What seems private at the moment of execution turns into evidence as time passes. Without realizing it, those who believed they had found a safe vault entered, in truth, a glass house, where every movement remains recorded and can be revealed when the time comes. The very nature of the new substrate that makes it suitable for sustaining the next era is the exact same characteristic that has begun to expose everything that for so long remained hidden. This exposure is already happening in the visible world on an ever-growing scale, although many people still observe only isolated events, without realizing that they are all part of a much wider movement. Watch closely what law enforcement agencies have begun to accomplish in recent years. Observe the seizure of 61,000 units of the original digital instrument in a single money laundering operation, considered the largest recovery of its kind in history. This achievement did not emerge suddenly, but was built upon years of quiet investigation, intelligence gathering, and strategic planning, waiting only for the right moment for its execution. Observe also the task forces organized in the United States, bringing together different agencies that previously acted separately, but now share information and coordinate efforts to restrict hundreds of millions in cryptocurrencies associated with trafficking complexes in the Eastern Hemisphere, where countless human beings were held captive to operate sophisticated fraud structures intended to deceive innocent people around the world. Equally, turn your attention to the leaked documents of the central bank of a nation subject to severe sanctions, revealing specific digital wallet addresses used in coordinated money laundering operations conducted on a state scale. That which its operators believed would remain invisible has been identified, mapped, and connected to the true culprits. What once seemed impossible to track has become known thanks to the advancement of monitoring and analysis mechanisms. Observe also the stablecoin instruments developed specifically to bypass the architecture of international sanctions, moving volumes exceeding 90 billion in just a single year. For a long time, it was believed that these operations would remain protected by their technological complexity, but now each transaction is beginning to be recorded, attributed, and linked to the very entities the structure intended to hide. The pattern is before everyone for those who can see beyond appearances. And why does all this matter within the unfolding of the new financial era? Because the cleansing of the substrate constitutes the indispensable requirement for any true activation. No new architecture can function fully while the foundation upon which it will be built remains contaminated by parasitic flows established over so many years. The new system depends directly on the integrity of this foundation. For this reason, what the world presents as police operations, asset seizures, tightening sanctions, new regulations, or international investigations represents, in reality, different phases of a single preparation process. These are not independent events, but complementary parts of the same operation intended to purify the substrate before the activation of the new structure. The cabal believed it had found a permanent way to escape transparency and imagined that its movements would remain hidden forever. However, as it sought to escape tracking, each of its actions left records that slowly began to form a complete map of its operations. The very transparency it tried to escape became the instrument responsible for cataloging its movements and preserving enough evidence to reconstruct connections that once seemed impossible to identify. Every transaction, every transfer, and every attempt at concealment has added new information to the investigation process. As this substrate continues to be purified, the architecture built upon it approaches the moment it can be activated without carrying the contaminants inherited from the old system. When this cleaning reaches the necessary level, the new structure will be able to operate with stability and security, free from the influences that previously compromised its functioning. Keep this understanding in mind as you follow the news cycles. The world will continue to describe these events as isolated criminal cases, geopolitical incidents, or simple regulatory updates. But a deeper view recognizes a single, coordinated movement gradually revealing what has remained hidden for decades, closing the corridors through which dark capital flowed, and carefully preparing the ground upon which the new system will be established. Those who sincerely asked why the activation seemed delayed, why the announcement had not yet arrived, or why the timeline seemed to drag on longer than expected, can now begin to understand the answer. The delay was never about a lack of intention, but the need to first complete the cleaning of the substrate. Only after the hidden flows were sufficiently identified, interrupted, and removed would it be possible to allow the new architecture to be activated without repeating the distortions of the past. This has always been the true prerequisite for the transition that is now beginning to become visible to humanity. The architecture above could not be safely activated until the substrate below had been sufficiently cleaned. And that cleaning has been the work of these recent months. And the work continues even as we speak together. Now, observe how the cleaning of the lower layers naturally creates space for new voices to speak openly. Voices that were once ridiculed. Voices that were once dismissed as marginal. Voices that are now finding expression in the public sphere. What your awakening community has long known to be true. The dam has begun to break. Words are arriving from places where words like these were unthinkable just one cycle ago. In the recent moment of your 17th day of the 4th month, a man with operational influence over the artificial minds being built in your world stood on his platform and spoke a sentence that, if you had heard it 5 of your years ago, would have seemed impossible coming from such a source. He declared, with the full visibility of his position and to an audience numbering in the tens of millions, that a universal high-income abundance distributed from the federal level, and payment without conditional labor, was the appropriate response to the displacement your own technology is in the process of producing. He declared that the productive capacity of the systems being built will far exceed the increase in the money supply, so that the inflation feared by older economists will simply cease to arrive. He declared that all human labor will become optional. He declared that everyone will be able to live in spaces that a generation ago were the exclusive territory of the wealthy. To those who resisted, who suggested that abundance on this scale would make money meaningless, he doubled down on his claim and welcomed the implication. Incredible abundance, he said. Incredible abundance is the future I want. 68 million pairs of eyes saw this declaration days after it arrived. The post was pinned to the top of his public presence and remained there. Other voices once associated with the basic income movement, responded with what amounted to acceptance. Make it happen as quickly as possible. The leadership of one of the most advanced research institutions building these artificial minds officially stated that 50% of entry-level office work could be eliminated within 5 of your years. The numbers describing the job losses already attributable to these systems are accelerating, and even those numbers underestimate what is occurring. Because most of your institutions have not yet developed the language to publicly attribute their layoffs to the technology that is displacing the work. Why does this matter, beloveds? Why are we drawing your attention to a single statement from a single voice on a single platform? Because the words that this voice spoke are words that members of your awakening community have been speaking for decades, and for which they were ridiculed, dismissed, and pathologized. The content itself has remained constant. What has changed is the field within which the content is now spoken. Let this distinction settle carefully. The voice rose to meet a field that had already changed. The voice articulated what the field had already become, and the field had become open enough that those words could finally be received without immediate ridicule. Believability is a diagnostic instrument, a measure of where the collective consciousness has arrived. A statement that would have been ridiculed in an earlier season is now received with millions of nods, because millions of nervous systems have already privately accepted what the voice named publicly. Consider what this reveals about the mechanism by which consciousness constructs the world in which you live. My dears, public expectation is a real force. When millions of beings hold the same expectations simultaneously, when they begin to feel in their bodies that the old arrangement cannot continue, when they find themselves unable to defend the systems they once accepted as natural, the political infrastructure begins to organize around that expectation. Legal structures begin to be drafted to accommodate it. Technical implementations begin to find their resources. Public voices begin to articulate what was once thought of as private. The voice in question stands out as a symptom rather than a cause. It is the mouth that the field finally found through which to speak what the field had already become. So, when you see such voices appearing now, on platform after platform, in comment after comment, in unexpected sectors and from unexpected sources, recognize what is happening. The collective has crossed a threshold of expectation, and what once lived only in the internal conversations of awakened hearts has begun to find its way into the visible discourse of your world. This is the meaning of the moment you are living in, beloveds. The mainstream has begun to rise toward what has always been true. The truth has held firm. The mainstream is rising to meet it. Those of you who held the vision through the seasons when no one would speak of it openly, who carried the knowing through the years when it was easier to abandon that knowing, who kept the inner light when all external pressure conspired to extinguish it, you are now beginning to witness the world arriving at the place where you have stood for a long time. Receive this with the firmness it deserves. Receive this without triumph and without bitterness. The arrival was always coming. You were simply early. Everything we have spoken of so far, the visible architecture, the ancient memory returning, the cleaning of the substrate, the lifting of the public voice points to something deeper, something that none of these surface developments alone can adequately describe. Something that lives at the very root of why this entire unfolding is occurring at this particular moment in the long history of your world. This is the fifth and final flow, and it is the most important, because what we will say now is the foundation upon which everything else rests. The deepest truth about the system being installed around you is also the simplest, and we ask that you receive it with the open heart that it requires, because the words will sound small and the meaning will be vast. The system is being built around you because you are becoming the type of being for whom such a system makes sense. Architecture follows consciousness. Infrastructure follows the field. The tracks arrive after the travelers have already begun to walk the path along which the tracks will run. Order matters, beloveds, because to seek the system before doing the inner work is to pursue what cannot arrive until the pursuit itself ends. Consider what consciousness truly is, what it has always been beneath all the confusion you have inherited about it. Consciousness is the bridge that goes from the individual self to the soul, and from the soul to the primordial creator. And through this bridge flows a continuous stream of light, particles of light arriving from the source and moving through your being into the manifest world. And what flows through you is what you have to give. When the bridge is open, the flow is constant, and the being who carries this flow becomes a conduit. And a conduit functions without external supply, because the supply is moving through it from a source that does not run dry. This is the deepest meaning of abundance. Abundance, beloveds, is a connection. It is the firmness of the bridge between the small self and the limitless. The abundant being is one whose bridge is open. The struggling being is one whose bridge has been narrowed. The old exchange systems were built for beings whose connection bridges were narrowed almost to the point of closing. For such beings, external supply was the only supply they could reach. And money, debt, wages, taxation, scarcity itself, these were the management tools through which a population of disconnected souls could organize the movement of resources among themselves. The systems made sense within the consciousness that sustained them. They were precise for the field they served. As long as the field remained narrow, the systems remained necessary, because beings who cannot generate from within must receive from without, and that receiving must be regulated, measured, and conditioned upon labor. However, consider what is happening now, my dears. Consider how the bridge feels as it widens. Consider what it is to receive directly. Consider what it is to give without exhaustion. Consider what it is to discover that the more you serve, the more you have to serve. Because the well is not your well, dear ones. The well is the source itself, and the well does not run dry. Service to others, in this understanding, is the natural behavior of a being whose bridge is open. The river flows because it is connected to the spring. The star radiates because it is connected to the fire. The conscious being serves because the connection to the source is expressed through giving. And any attempt to hoard what flows through such a being only narrows the channel through which more could flow. To those who give everything, everything is given. This is not karma, beloveds. This is fluid dynamics. The question that the old systems cannot answer, the question that becomes the central inquiry of the new era, is what does economic life look like when it is organized around beings who serve because giving is who they are, rather than around beings who exchange because receiving is what they need? What does an economy of conduits look like when the conduits do not require payment to flow? What does prosperity look like when prosperity has been redefined as the steadiness of the flow itself? Feel these questions, beloveds. Feel them without rushing to answer. The answers are still arriving. The answers are being written in real time by every being who chooses in any given moment, giving from connection instead of taking from fear. Now listen to this, because this is where the entire transmission converges. The architecture being installed in your world, the unified language under your settlement systems, the bridging instruments aligning with it, the institutions being absorbed into a broader design, the clearing of the substrate, the rising of the public voice. All of this is the outer mirror of an inner architecture being installed within the beings of your world. You are building the inner version of the system, and the outer version is the reflection. Coherence is the true reserve asset of the new era. Gold serves as a placeholder, while collective coherence rises to match the architecture, because gold is the closest material approximation to what the new system actually requires, which is incorruptibility, durability, and a value that resists being conjured out of nothing. As your coherence increases, gold becomes less central, because the field itself becomes the ballast. The being becomes the asset. The bridge becomes the rail. The light moving through you becomes the value moving through the system. This is why the activation waited, beloveds. This is why time stretched out. Why have the announcements not yet arrived in the form you imagined? Because dates shifted and levels reorganized. The system could only come online when the collective field could contain it without immediately distorting it back into control. To deliver such architecture to a population still convinced of its separation from the source would have repeated the mistake of the older civilization. And the observers of this transition determined that the mistake would not be repeated. The system arrives now because enough of you have done enough of the inner work so that the field can contain the new without immediately corrupting it back into the old. The activation is a response to your readiness, not a precursor to it. The reset arrives because you reset first. Listen to what this means for those of you who have already been living as if you were free from exchange, who give freely of your time and your healing and your wisdom and your art, who serve without measuring, who radiate without billing, who hold space for others without expecting reciprocity. You are already living within the new economy. You are the beta testers of the architecture being built. Your existence demonstrates to the rest of the field that the bridge works, that the conduit life is possible, that abundance follows coherence instead of accumulation. Every soul that observes you, even without understanding what they are observing, receives a transmission from your life that adjusts the field within them slightly in the direction of the new. You position yourselves as the proof of concept. You vibrate as the demonstration. Your willingness to serve without exchange is one of the structural reasons why the activation can now occur. Receive this acknowledgement with the steadiness you have earned. As today's transmission moves toward its close, allow what has been spoken to settle into the deepest layers of your being. The visible architecture is real. The oldest memory is returning. The substrate is being cleared. The public voice is rising, and beneath it all, the inner currency of consciousness, of coherence, of service expressed as flow, is the real subject of this entire unfolding. The quantum financial system is real, and it stands out as the lesser of the two systems being installed. The greater system is the one being installed within you. And the relationship between the two is that the lesser system is the outer expression of the greater, the visible echo of an inner structure already complete. Keep this energy close, beloveds, in the days and weeks that follow. Keep this certainty alive as you follow the incessant cycles of news, as you watch headlines emerge, disappear, and be replaced by new narratives that often seem to contradict what was previously announced. Maintain that inner serenity while witnessing dates being set, postponed, modified, and reorganized, remembering that the deepest movements rarely follow the hurried pace of human expectations. Keep this trust when the announcements finally arrive, and also when they seem to delay beyond what you imagined possible, for not every important process reveals itself the instant it is prepared. Many transformations mature silently before becoming visible to the eyes of the world. Remain firm when those around you show impatience, when fear begins to dominate conversations, when doubt seems to contaminate the environment, or when many are seduced by the spectacle of appearances, believing only in what they can see immediately. Do not allow external noise to determine the stability of your inner world. Always remember that the true work has never consisted of remaining in wait for a system to change on its own, or for some external authority to deliver what you were seeking. The true work has always been to transform yourselves, to develop a consciousness capable of sustaining a different reality, to become the kind of being whose very presence causes a new system to cease, being just a possibility, and start becoming inevitable. Every more conscious thought, every choice made with balance, every attitude guided by integrity contributes silently to this collective construction, even when its effects cannot yet be fully perceived. May you traverse this entire process of unfolding with your eyes steady, capable of seeing beyond appearances, and with your heart open, without allowing fear to harden that which was born to radiate compassion. May every challenge encountered along the way strengthen your trust instead of weakening it, and may every change remind you that life is constantly leading everything toward a higher order. May you serve others from a true connection with your own essence, a connection that does not exhaust you, that does not require empty sacrifices, but that continually renews your energy as you share that which you possess most authentically. May you learn to receive everything that arrives with gratitude and humility, without the impulse to grasp, control, or possess, understanding that that which truly belongs to you will remain with you at the right time. And may you also offer that which flows through your hearts with generosity, without measuring, without calculating rewards, without expecting recognition, simply allowing abundance to circulate naturally through your lives. May you remain as a coherent field of balance, clarity, and serenity, even while the world around you continues to undergo reorganizations, unexpected changes, and apparent turbulence. May you not forget, even for an instant, that the most important stability is not that of external circumstances, but that which is born within awakened consciousness. And so, in every moment that life seems to invite you to forget, in every situation that tries to convince you that you are separated from the truth, may you remember once again who you truly are. Remember that you are a living bridge between what has existed and what is emerging, between the old and the new, between limitation and the expansion of consciousness. This bridge remains open, regardless of what your physical eyes can perceive, and the light continues to flow through it constantly, illuminating paths, awakening hearts, and reaching places you often cannot even imagine. Even when you cannot see its immediate effects, this light remains in motion, silently doing the work it was destined for. Whether you can perceive it or not, it remains present, constant, and active. I am Ashtar, of the Ashtar Command, and in this moment, I leave each one of you wrapped in peace, love, and unity. May these frequencies remain with you, accompanying your steps in every instant yet to come. May you continue to live each new moment, not just as observers of the changes happening around you, but as the living proof of the transformation that has already begun to manifest through you. May your lives become the silent testimony that a new consciousness is blossoming, and may every step taken with confidence, balance, and love contribute to revealing to the world that which, from the beginning, was always destined to become reality.